Howdy howdy, and welcome back to the Native Naturalist channel, where on today's video, we're going to get declassified. Now, trying to find someone who knows about declassified government projects, like the Manhattan Project or MKUltra, is like trying to find Zen in a frat house. It's bound to happen. With the only difference between myself and the average person when it comes to these projects is that they're probably not on a government watch list, but luckily I don't have a permanent address, so joke's on them. Anyways, for today, I want us to go back to 1945. World War II just ended, and it seems like everybody was just starting to take a breather. The world was left with two global superpowers, the United States and Soviet Russia, with the only difference between these two global superpowers being that America decided to add a second sun to Japan's flag, and the Soviet Union was down about 20 million people. And at this time, America was hyper-focused on the expansion of the free market, and Russia was just trying not to get invaded by Germany, which in retrospect makes you think that Germany never really got the message the first time post-World War II. So in an attempt to prevent the invasion of Russia, the Soviet Union would create this almost communist domain expansion, and this would be done through the persuasion of Russian troops that were located in Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland to adopt communist beliefs. And obviously America would raise an eyebrow to this because they think that this expansion of communist beliefs is encroaching on their free market territory. So to kind of, since I've already committed to the JJK bit, the United States would essentially deploy a simple domain, which would be the Truman Doctrine. And now that we have a very simplified version of the events of the two nations kind of swapping hands a little bit, we get to what is eventually known as the Cold War, even though technically it's not a war. By definition, it's more of an era, but that's besides the point. And so now that we're in a new era, the US would officially establish three new agencies. We have the National Security Council, we have the Atomic Energy Commission, and most importantly for our story, the Central Intelligence Agency. And you know what they say, more money, more problems, but arms race ain't one. We would hit 1950, where the tensions between America and the Soviet Union were at an all-time high. We would have the increasing Soviet pressure in West Berlin. We would have the increase of communist interactions in China after the Chinese Revolution. And then lastly, but most importantly, Russia would deploy their own atomic bomb. And yeah, so you would think to yourself like, whoa, wait, how did they get America's toys? Well, remember how during the Manhattan Project that I mentioned earlier, to conceive a device that is as destructive as an atomic bomb, the United States had to do a little bit of like a brain drain of other countries in order to create a project that was as extensive as the Manhattan Project? Well, when you have Germans and Russians that were also a part of that larger project, and now you have tensions between Russia and the United States, they're going to be leakers. Which leads us to our favorite pastime during the Cold War, which was espionage. And this was the bread and butter of these two nations. I mean, they were like two sorority houses just going at each other's throat. You had disinformation campaigns, you had information leaks, and the use of technology to commit all of this. I mean, who needs to leave an AirPod in Ashley's bedroom whenever the Soviets were using like shoe mics first? So while the Soviets used things like lipstick pistols and the previously mentioned shoe mics to commit espionage, the Americans kind of took it in a different direction. Anything ranging from mics that were disguised as tiger shit during the Vietnam War, to the use of robotic fish to take water samples and hidden nuclear plants, and for the topic of conversation today, which is the INSECTOTHOPTER. Modeled after the common green darter, this species is commonly found in the United States. I'll put a photo up here, but it was also found in Russia and China. And this little guy would be the cornerstone to what would be one of the largest leaps in insect-based robotics. And you may be wondering to yourself, like, why an insect? Why not like a mammal? Or why not just use an everyday item like the Russians were doing? And well, the everyday item transmitter thing was so overplayed that if you were to go into any government building at this time period, you were probably going to get what was close to a colonoscopy. And before they went to the INSECTOTHOPTER, which I'm just going to say dragonfly because that's a lot of syllables, I just don't feel like saying that. I did mention that they tried mammals, but specifically a cat. They tried to mic up a cat near an embassy wall so that they could get an idea of what conversations were happening in that area, or maybe the cat could sneak through. But if you are a cat owner, or you know somebody that has a cat, or even you just know of a cat, You could probably see where that went. Covert mics and cats off the table, they went right back to the drawing board. But when they were going back to the drawing board, they remembered a little funny thing that the CIA's research division kind of batched up not too long ago, which were retroreflectors. And this retroreflector, which in our case would be glass beads, would take in a laser, move it in a inverted triangular motion, and send it back to its source. And okay, like lasers are cool and all, but what does that have to do with listening in to government conversations? Well, sound tends to vibrate glass. If you have a form of glass like a window or like beads, they're gonna vibrate whenever that frequency is hitting it. And the thought process was, if a laser were to go through those retroreflectors, the distortion from the vibration of whatever sound was in that vicinity would distort the laser as well. So when it was sent back, the CIA could actually analyze it and get a form of a replication of what that conversation was. And this form of conversational interception was so impactful that 60 years later, it would be used to be able to identify
Osama bin Laden
and Abbottabad by using the laser on a window of the room that they were in. And not only were they able to identify the individual that would be
Osama bin Laden,
they also identified how many people were in the room and how many people were in like other rooms within that building. So it's pretty effective. And that leads us to the INSECTOTHOPTER project, which was created by Don Reiser, who was the deputy head of the CIA's Office of Research and Development. And he would seek out Charles Atkins to lead this project. And Atkins' initial goal was to just get a device that was covert enough, so an insect of some sort, to fly out 200 meters and carry a 0.2 gram payload of these beads over to an embassy wall, deploy them, and then be able to use it to intercept conversations. And initially, their thought was to use a bee. And yeah, that didn't work so well. And luckily, there was another CIA scientist that was on, I guess, a separate project within that same building that was a huge dragonfly enthusiast. And I tried to find the name of this guy, but every document I could find, like a SCP file type deal where everything was fucking redacted. So, but this guy was a dragonfly enthusiast, and he was really trying to sell Atkins on the probability that a dragonfly could be the model species for this project. And Atkins was pretty apprehensive to the whole thing. So the other scientists went off to go grab his specimens, and when he came back, Atkins would say, "This old fellow plucked an insect from its perch and tossed it up in the air. It made about 2 circuits and landed nicely." And this demonstration was so impactful that the rush for a replication was a must. And here's the thing, although in theory, dragonfly aerodynamics in flight is not as complicated as a bee, there are just a few things that we didn't know at the time that I'll get into here in a second that would cause issue for the project later on. And for this, I'm gonna need to do a physical demonstration, and I have no shame, so it's fine. But they believed that a dragonfly's flight was merely an upward motion, downward motion on a horizontal plane. So just like, I don't even know if I could stretch out all the way. So it's just like, imagine my arms are straight, and this is like, so it was just a matter of up, down, up, down, up, down. That's what they thought. But we would later figure out in a Cambridge publication in 1981, and then a Cornell publication in 2008, that it's more of a row, so kind of more in this motion than it is just purely up and down. And that will play a huge factor in stabilization, and we'll get there, but yeah, just wanted to put that out there. But to replicate this motion, just merely the up and down motion, is where things get a little interesting. And so for this section, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I completely understand fluid dynamics, so I'm going to try to keep this in layman's terms for the sake of myself, but also for you watching. Fluidic oscillators are kind of a, for lack of a better term, an engine that is used to run a larger device, but without the mechanical structure that a typical engine with pistons and everything else would have to use. And these oscillators were basically powered by the ability of fluid within a system, but also lithium nitrate crystals, which would create air pressure within a system. And this was done for 2 separate reasons: mechanical wear and speed. When you're thinking of a dragonfly wing flap, or yeah, whatever, it's going pretty damn fast. We're talking like 40 hertz fast. So for anything to move that fast mechanically, you're talking about something that's either going to wear down super quickly or the entire system's going to implode like Ocean Gate's Titan. But something that runs on liquid and gas could get to that speed without all the wear and tear. And actually, I'm wrong. There's a third reason: jet propulsion. So whenever they were doing initial test trials, they figured out that the Dragonfly was able to fly around, but it could not carry the payload, which is kind of like the whole point of this project. But they figured out that they could use the gas pressure from the lithium nitrate crystals to create a jet propulsion through an exhaust area. So after the creation of this exhaust panel, they would run a couple more test trials and eventually be successful in getting the Dragonfly to fly, but also to carry the payload from point A to point B. And now that their Dragonfly can successfully get there, the issue was being able to control it. And this couldn't be done through radio because the hardware would be too heavy. But do you remember the lasers from earlier? They're infrared, which means we have heat. And because the infrared laser could provide heat, they attached bimetallic stripping to not only the exhaust panel, but the sides of the Dragonfly so they can adjust pitch and yaw. So basically giving it a full control to be able to go up and down and side to side. So this was it. After various trials and test runs, they were finally able to not only control it, but be able to fly this Dragonfly out 200 meters and deploy the beads. With the only downside being that they couldn't land the Dragonfly, they just were okay with the fact that it's going to crash at the end of this operation. But with its completion in a laboratory setting, the real question was, how is this going to be done in reality? And well, Atkins would say this: the ultimate demonstration of controlled power flight has not yet been achieved. Though the flights were impressive, controls and any kind of crosswind was too difficult. Yeah, so do you remember the whole up and down versus row formation thing that we were talking about earlier? That plays a huge factor in Dragonfly stabilization just in general. So whenever there was a situation where they had to test this Dragonfly outside of a laboratory setting, they realized that crosswinds and gusts up to like 5 miles an hour really messed up the Dragonfly's ability to fly. And with it being a very manual process with you controlling the Dragonfly's flight through a laser system, it was very dependent on not only the winds that day, but the individual who was controlling this Dragonfly. And so after $140,000, and roughly for today's inflation, it's about $2 million, the project would be considered done and would be scrapped. And although the success of the Insectothopter wasn't exactly what the CIA was expecting, this failed project would be a grandfather to a whole new generation of insect-based robotics. We would have everything ranging from the Skeeter drone by Animals Dynamic to a literal cyborg Dragonfly developed by Charles Stark Dapper Laboratories, meaning that the legacy of this failed Dragonfly project would continue in the minds of future entomology enthusiasts. And yeah, I think I'm going to call it here. I appreciate you watching the video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you on the flip side.